I want to point out that the ordinary level, under everyday affairs, people are made to believe, and they say they believe, that experience has got to be the ultimate teacher. And yet to do this, the time must slip upon you very shortly that you realize that what the experience, all the experiences that you had, and the experiences that seemed to be available, in no wise has to include feelings that you have missed out on being able to go on great trips and do great experiments and sometimes pass. Just a general experience that seemed to be available to a person in your position in life. That very shortly you've got to realize that there was no information available that would have come from any of that. It did not come if you had had your small dreams of taking off to India or spending 4 years on a commune, or if you had met Muhammad before he died, or Buddha. That what seems to be experience would have made no real change. That you would still be what you are. You would still be what you are before you got involved with this. What is needed is a kind of non-binary, unmeasurable new information, and it does not arrive from experience, because anything that you have received here, that you apparently started picking up here, not what you actually ended up seeing for yourself, but what seemed to be the beginning line along some measurement that I'd made, some map that I had sketched. All you've got to realize, and we're not playing bragging on me, all you've got to realize that it had not been for you finding me and running across this. There's no way by accident. It's not out in a book. You would not heard somebody just stand up suddenly in a bar or a synagogue or a church and go, wait a minute, I just thought of something. Like human eyesight, it's where people's opinions and beliefs overlap. That's where the secret is. Thank you very much, thank you very much. And people go, wow, that's great. You had never heard it. So in a sense, it does not come about through ordinary experience. I mean, you couldn't call this ordinary. Even you people out of town, you may be sitting in an ordinary New York apartment or an L.A. condo or somewhere, and it seems rather ordinary. You're sitting on furniture, you're watching on a TV set, or you're sitting here in person. But the experience of being exposed to this is not normal. It would not have happened accidentally. So the whole idea that is already implanted in the human nervous system, that if anything, everything, when you get down to it, to city consciousness, everything that is potentially of great importance, the real value, real use, it has got to come about in some way from experience. We learn from our experience. Experience is the great teacher. And what people learn from experience is not what people who get involved with this need. You have got to recognize that the kind of information that is not available through ordinary experience, that pops out through these kinds of unusual holes in life periodically to some small group of people. The information is actually too subtle, it's too powerful, but I wanted to start off, it's too subtle to fit into any ordinary vocabulary that is binary based, which is our vocabulary. It's a vocabulary based on opposites. But it's got to be binary. You cannot define a word. There is no such thing. If you remember that line that I tried to push you toward some time back, there is no such thing as one thought, one feeling. There cannot be. There's also no such thing as one word. The idea is that the God somewhere went Shazam or whatever it was, you know, that the Word was God and God was the Word, and the God said whammo or be. That wouldn't get it. That would not have produced a three-dimensional world. It would not have produced a three-dimensional world that had any ability to perceive itself, to be conscious of itself, because the one word wouldn't get it. You couldn't have heard it. So he just said, be, and everything was made, or whatever those kind of gods would say. But if he just said, be, like one word, whatever was brought into being could never perceive itself. You've got to have at least two words to get it going. It is a simple fact that everything that we say under ordinary conditions, everything that operates through the senses, is a vocabulary based upon opposites. It is based upon comparisons And I want you to see now one little bit more of the overlapping of me using the, am I drawing big enough?
Yes.
Of the overlapping of eyesight, if you recall, the part where it actually produces, or the necessary part to produce the full impact of stereoscopic sight. And last time we met, I was pointing out to you that there has to be two different views. In the same way that the eyes have to be some degree apart. That one eye looks at something, and there has to be a slight shift for the other eye to get it. And I pointed out that you have got to have a slight shift, even at the three-dimensional level of trying to understand what's going on in life. Not try to understand. To understand what's going on in life, you have got to have a slightly different view of everything. But now there's another little trick that I want to point out. In the same way that the two views have to be separate, there have to be a slight change if you be able to see what seems to be your automatic view or feeling about one thing. You have to have another slightly different view of it. But the view can't be too different, or you would end up with two choices. One is, you end up what used to be known as cockeyed, or you end up cross-eyed. The cockeyed is on this basis. Now, this is not just funny drawings, because some of you are going to hear this immediately. I'll give some of you the chance to hear something before I say it. When things are too far apart and you can end up cockeyed instead of giving the full depth, this would lead me to say again why being a reformed anything is a waste of time. All right, I'll circle back to it. I thought some of you might be able to jump on that already. If what seems to be the two views of something are too far apart, in the same way that if your eyes, if I said, look, it's worth $1 million, it's a great trick, and I want you to watch both of my fingers. Put your left eye on my right finger and your right eye on my left finger. And don't keep them right in the center of each eye. And you go, all right, and I start this, and you could actually do it. You end up what used to be called, I assume it still is called, cockeyed. But your eyes would be out here. What this amounts to, what I'm bringing this up for, is this happens. Life uses it as a part of the mechanism that makes things rock back and forth, that makes life move at the 3D level. And that is that there is a crude kind of working knowledge that you need two views of things. Not in my sense, but in this sense. That if an ordinary person in the city believes they have a drinking problem, what is the cure? That they got a view, all right, for whatever reason. They finally end up with this view that I drink too much. So what's the cure? To become a reformed drunk. And I know that many of you have nervous systems that still wrestle with me periodically saying that a reformed drunk is no better than a drunk compared to this. A reformed anything is no better than his or her original condition in regards to this. In the city, it's irrelevant. If somebody becomes a reformed drunk, it simply means one thing: life needed another reformed drunk. If somebody does not become a reformed drunk and they die in their cups, that means that life, just as well, they need another drunk. That's all it means. But insofar as doing something, insofar as real change of the nervous system, a reformed, and fill it in, blank. Somebody's converted, somebody goes to a church, and they seem to undergo some experience, or they say they do, and they say, I am not the same person. I was a low-life, drinking, fornicating son of a bitch, but now I'm a Methodist. That is no change. But let's assume that their verbal description was that they were far removed, if we could define a Methodist in some way. They don't drink, and they are faithful to their wife, and they pay their taxes, and they don't hurt anybody else. As opposed to, before I did this, I used to get drunk and run over people and have wrecks, and I beat up my wife and cheated, So, it would apparently, I have made a great change. The two views, I'm not saying the person, the people don't quit drinking, but there is no change. There is no new view, there is no new information because the two views were too far apart. The two perspectives were too far apart, and you end up cockeyed. You end up with no stereoscopic vision, and all of you should know this. You should be able to hear pieces of it. You cannot find a reformed anything. Somebody says they're reformed, and they'll eventually use that word all over the world. They may say, well, I'm now a Methodist or a Baptist, or I belong to AA, or no, hey, I can't go out and drink with you guys anymore. I've settled down with my wife. I realize what a joy I had, and I'm not going to even risk that. And they'll say, all right, I'm reformed. I'm a reformed something. I'm a reformed person. A reformed person is another trick of city life insofar as real change, because you go too far. And surely, I'm not going to forever. I keep threatening not to, of having to back up and go over and over and say, I'm not saying that somebody apparently, so your consciousness at city level will not stretch far enough to take in everything. If you recall from a few nights back. I'm not saying, you could say, all right, if somebody quits drinking, they'll live longer. There's statistics to prove it. I know that. I've read the same thing. But can you see that you've got to pull your perception further? What does that prove? It proves nothing. In the 3D world, nothing proves nothing. A reformed anything, what I started to say, all of you should have some crude, at least, awareness of this. A reformed anything doesn't have the least understanding what happened. In a sense, if you've ever been around a reformed anything, in a sense, if you weren't all that caught up with it, they're worse off. That is, they're worse off to be around. They do not understand anything. There is no humility, as it's called in the 3D world. There is no compassion. There is no depth of understanding about what happened to me. It's to run up a cast iron vixillium. They're waving a banner made up of razor blades. They are, and for all intents and purposes, it may be down at a low level just within the family or a neighborhood, but they have become a fanatic. That, God, I wish I'd quit drinking 20 years ago. I'd still have my first wife. My children would not now refuse to speak to me. I'd still have my business. They become fanatical about it because the second view, the alternate view, the other's perspective is too far apart from the original. But notice, in the city, that's all that's available. If people make a great change, it apparently is brought about apparently comes about from some new great understanding. To ask a man, why did you quit? You were a drunk 2 years ago last time I saw you. And now look, you got a good job. What a change. I'll be glad to tell you. And they will. You can't stop them. It has produced no in-depth, it has produced no new complex stereoscopic vision of them, of themselves, of life. And you should know that. And it's not a matter that they'll live longer and their liver will not now smoke like a diesel engine. There is a very subtle place where this overlaps, that it cannot be too distant. And the cross-eyed part, I don't know whether I'm even going to try to go into, but it's to stay in the 3D world. It's not just so far apart, but it's where in the city sometimes, it's not as common as getting cockeyed, is the second view shifts a little bit in depth. That if you start off with one view over here about what it is to drink or be a drunk, instead of actually going so far in the other direction to become cockeyed, they're too far removed that you fanatically quit drinking for some reason. It's like your right eye, then you can pick up another view and drop to the left one. You pick up another view, but it changes in depth somewhere. In the city, if that sounds too complex, in the city, I guess the most common description would be is a person comes up with a new rationalization. That yes, well, they start off for a while. You hear them say, well, yes, I guess I do drink too much. And I know the statistics, and I know sometimes I've been arrested several times in the last couple of years for DUI, and I guess, I don't know, I probably should do something about the drinking. And you might see them X amount days, months later, and they have a slightly different view. They say, you know what, there's some very interesting statistics out now. New England Journal of Medicine, as a matter of fact, that a small amount of alcohol on a regular basis, they now have statistics show that you have a 30%, a man does, less likelihood of a stroke and heart attack. The view has changed just a little bit, and you're now no better off, no worse than the cockeyed guy, but now they begin to overlap at a different field depth, and you become cross-eyed, and they haven't merged. It's not like bringing them closer together where they make more sense. It's now just like it's a slightly different form of mechanical insanity, of mechanical behavior, but instead of there being one possible view like, well, I'm a drunk and I don't care, or I drink and I enjoy it, I don't care what anybody says, as opposed to I'm a reformed something or other. The other one is a slight skewing of what would have been the opposite view, and they begin to overlap just a little bit, but not at the same in-depth feel to your vision, to your perception. That the second one, what seems to be your new view, is not on the same plane as you started out. Many times this happens, if this still sounds too complex, with age. They attribute to, and with men especially, to the 40-year-old crazies, and they seem to think it's some kind of cultural phenomenon, and it's not, since there is no such thing, but it is molecular. Women have their own version, but I was going to pick on men for a minute, and things seem to happen with men that is not simply that makes them cockeyed many times. But you find a man, and as I said, women have their own version, but men seems to be the more commonly known and talked about now, that you see a guy after a couple of years and something's different. You know, he's got a new hairpiece, or finally got a hairpiece, and he's driving a Jaguar, and he's divorced his wife, and yet he does not say that he's reformed from what he was. He may not say, well, I suddenly wised up serendipitously at the age of 40 that I was wasting my life with a rat race and I was tired of being married to that same old woman and all that. He may not say that. It's not like I've become a reformed middle-class person. It's like, I don't know, I just seem to have found myself. I seem to have kind of reached a peak of my career, and I realized I should take it easy a little bit. I still like old Margaret that I was married to, and I see the kids, and I send her money. I don't feel bad about that. I've kept up with the alimony. It's not an exact running too far apart of the two views. It changes the focal plane, and they begin to overlap just a little. And you become cross-eyed. The subtle part, the reason I went through some of this, the subtle part is, to use in the revolutionary sense what I was talking about last time we were here, you have got to have willfully two different views of everything, but it's got to be on the same plane. They can't be too far, and your experience cannot teach you how to run this kind of revolutionary art wherein you take in two views of every creature, every experience, and every feeling. There is no book, there is no measuring tool other than me, and then your experience, which is unnatural, if you can do it. But there is no way to say, all right, you've got to keep the views. When you're going to get two views of, let's say, your relationship to your mother. All right, the two views, the one you got now, let's establish and put it at coordinates X and Y. Then the second view has got to be no further than 14 degrees on a new axis. There's no way to do that. It is subtle. It cannot be described, it cannot be put down in a book, but it cannot even be verbally described in a vocabulary based upon opposites. But you can see if it goes too far. Because if it goes too far, you become cockeyed. If it goes too far, you become a reformed blank. And anyone involved with this in any way who believes, God forbid that you've ever said it, but if any of you actually feel that, thanks to being around this, you become a reformed something or other. You have gone off on a small trail. You've gone off on a small little tangent on your own. Because a real revolutionist is not a reformed anything. Nothing. You can't be. Because to be a reformed something, you have got to become cockeyed. To become a reformed something, you have taken a pancake that fell on the floor and you thought, after all these years, I'm sick, of that dirty side, so you turn it over and lay it on its other side. And then you're going to hold it up on a stick as, look what I've done. I'm going to eat it any minute now. You cannot be a reformed anything. Now, you certainly will assume, well, some of you already know it, subtle changes begin to take place. But you don't become a reformed anything To be a reformed anything, you have got to verbalize it, at least to yourself. And in the city, I've never known, in my limited experience here these thousands of years, along with you, I have never known anyone in the city to become a reformed anything that they didn't tell somebody. That's part of the way the world is wired up. So even if you were changed to the point that you could be classified as a reformed something or another, you'd never say it. In fact, if you were asked about it, you'd deny it. If you had to respond, if somebody actually said, well, I noticed some kind of change in your behavior, you've reformed, you would have to deny it. Of course, a real revolutionist will deny everything. That's another story, but you've got to be able to deny everything. But you cannot be a reformed anything. To be a reformed anything is another extreme view, and it is not stereoscopic. It does not produce understanding. I shouldn't have to preach on that. All of you, in some way or the other, reformed yourself before you ever got involved with this. That you quit smoking, you cut your coffee consumption in half, you quit hanging around the bus station dressed up like Eleanor Roosevelt. All of you did something. Or all of you, some of you decided, I am too lazy and I am going to make myself finish college. Now that I'm on my own and nobody's paying my way, I'm going to do it. So all of you feel as though that you turned over in some area of your life, whether it seemed to be fairly significant looking back or not. At the time it was, but everybody in some way feels as though that you experienced a complete turning over of a new leaf in some area of your life. But you should be able to look right back in your nervous system, right in this big old eye, right now, real quick, and look. And you realize, like, the change. We're not going into, well, I enjoyed the change when I did it, when I decided to lose weight. I'd been fat all my life and I lost weight. And I can think back now that you mention it, and it was really fun. I remember that. But the question as to, did it have some effect on your understanding? Were you actually a changed person? The answer is simply no. Turning one thing into its opposite from a view does not produce any new depth of understanding. It does not produce any new depth of perception. I want to pick up something else. Several nights ago when I was talking about what should, in a certain way, be an 11th commandment, would be, do not be wasteful. This is connected with something else, if you can see it. And that would be, unless I change my mind while I'm talking about it here, we'll start off and call it the intellectual food chain. It is not limited absolutely to what ordinary people would think of as intellectual, but it is a food chain. It is an operation. It is established. You do not have a choice. You are a part of it, and it is singular to humans at the 3D observable level. It is that which would classify as being an intellectual food chain. It is a whole ecosystem that would be those areas unique to man. But let me start with it in areas that would apparently be absolutely or strictly intellectual. That there is a food chain, and the revolutionist has got to be aware of it. Other people are not, and it's of no consequence, but they are a part of it. They are eating, and they are being eaten, not physically, and the way I want to start out pointing it, in a sense, I can describe it with what seems to be very little passionate connection. The intellectual food chain. Let us say that you are somewhere in the middle, intellectually, of our time and place. Let's say that when you started this. Right below you in the food chain, the intellectual food chain, may I point out some glaring examples. May I be so bold? The National Enquirer. All sorts of occult, New Age, metaphysical writings. Sad songs, as far as the words go. Emily Dickinson poetry. most movies. But there is a food chain, there is a level below just where should be the entrance level of you being involved with this. Just where you should be to be walking around cities sane enough. And you should not be partaking, here I go pointing out the obvious, you should not be availing yourself and eating in the food chain lower than you are. Now I can make that real crude, but I guess you can think about it a second. Physically in the food chain, you would not eat lower than you are. If you did and anybody knew it, they'd lock you up. Fill in your own crudeness. Above what should be the normal operating level to be here of the food chain is where you should be looking for nourishment. Now I ask you, where can you find it? This is not in any way to indicate that there is no fun available in studying physics, reading about science, reading about all sorts of things, taking up new mental games. Well, all of you that's been around me, and all of you know that I certainly do not infer that whatsoever. But that is not actually a level above you in the food chain. The truth is, in the intellectual food chain in the city, there is nothing above man. In the city, people cannot realize that. Because we're out to use these descriptions, and were someone in the city, an ordinary person to hear this, they'd say, well, you're wrong. Because there are areas. I finished school. I've got a master's degree, but I can sit down right now and try and deal with some of the advanced mathematics involved with just rudimentary quantum physics, and I'm lost. And so there are areas, there are intellectual areas in what you're calling the intellectual food chain. There are areas that are higher than I am, that if I could read it, I agree with what you're saying. I'd be wasting my time, and I'm eating lower in the food chain, to sit around and read that kind of nonsense in these fish wrappers at the newsstand, the checkout areas of the grocery store. I agree to that, but you're wrong to say that there's nothing higher in the chain, because the world of science, much of what's going on in the world of psychology now, is above me in the food chain, because I do not have any first-hand knowledge of it. I haven't had time to read and keep up, etc. And it's not true. If it were true, then they could read something on that in some area and it would change their life, and you should all know that that's not true. The city does not provide intellectual food in this food chain that I am noting for you higher than the general bell curve, the middle class of city life now has reached. That's it. Just taking you as being a fairly well-read, sophisticated, middle class, 1988 American, what you know, where you are in the intellectual food chain, is it. You're at the top of it. The only place that you can get any nourishment is somewhere that is unnaturally plugged into the food chain. It is somewhere genetically in life at any given time that you can eat something that you do not need. You're eating something that if you attempted in some way, if you were so foolish, to prove, well, this is nourishing. Ordinary people would say, if they listened at all, they'd say, you are eating imaginary candy. You are eating potential neurosis. You are eating just insanity. There should be a continuing awareness, and it does not have to do, I didn't bring this up, if I must tell any of you people, you've seen these tapes, to rag on me. This is not hooray for me night. And it does not just have to do with books or lectures. But to do this correctly, you need to have an awareness, because everyone is wired up to still have city heroes. You carry them around for a long time. And I say city heroes, not just individuals, not just picturing an Einstein or a Freud. But you have heroes in the sense that you do believe that out there in the street, out there in the city, from ordinary sources, inside the hallowed ivory walls of some university or some think tank somewhere, that there is really superior food in an intellectual food chain than the area to which you now have access, and it's not. It will not change the nervous system. There is not that kind of shock. There is not that kind of growth potential in any food that's available. There is no great punchline to this paragraph tonight, but all of you need to be aware of that. And it has nothing ultimately to do with how much time you might apparently spend going to a movie, sitting down and reading the newspaper. It is not simply that. It is not simply for me to infer that I could or should come up with some absolute rule of conduct like don't anybody ever even look at the news, at the headlines on the National Enquirer while you're staying there paying for your apples and grapefruits. Don't even look at it. But you need to have a continuing awareness that there is an intellectual food chain and that you are, in a sense, hurting yourself because you're definitely starving yourself to feed lower on the chain than you are now. Because where you are now, where you start out, there's no great shakes. Or if I wanted to be a little cruder, I could say that regardless of how it is attacked at times, the human intellect is not necessarily a waste of time. Or ordinary thought is not necessarily a waste of time, but it is the way you do it. Which is simply to see how much of the ordinary intellectual processes, how much time it has taken up in your life and what effect it's had, what you seem to have taught yourself, what you seem to have learned from your experience, or what you apparently have been able to pick up a book of some repute, and that you actually were changed by it. Or just simply, once you know what we're talking about, that you actually learned anything by it. You learn facts, but did your nervous system get fertilized? Was there some sort of unexpected, unnatural shock take place? No. And people know that such shocks are possible, to wit the historic continuing interest, consumption of certain drugs. But they know that the nervous system can be shocked. They can be shocked, and I go through little temporary periods I have in the past that I saw things that were unbelievable. Not spooky. I saw real things that were unbelievable. I just can't remember exactly what they were. And the next time I smoked that stuff or chewed those mushrooms, something happened. It must have been a bad year, but I can't get it back. But they know that the nervous system can be shocked, and that you can turn around and suddenly see quite ordinary things in a way that does not simply resemble a 1960 psychedelic poster. But you just turn around and you see people, you see life, and realize, wow, all this was right here all the time, and I never saw it. You know, I got to remember this. And then you get over it, and you can't remember it. All you remember is it was astounding. But what you should be able to remember is that that is possible. And in the city, they know it's possible. Life allows that kind of knowledge. Do any of you find it interesting, now that's on a side subject right quick, the so-called battle, the war against drugs? Does anybody find that interesting? Does anybody find it interesting that how the myriad views expressed and the different views expressed here in our country, let's say, there are oft times when they conflict, one side accuses the other of using this whole despicable, shameful, societal wrecking drug war. They use it politically, and we shouldn't be doing that. We should all be working together, but one side's not doing their job. The people in charge now are not doing it. Does anybody find it interesting, even the term the war on drugs, and does anybody find it interesting that going through all these apparent conflicting views, you should have some nervous system sensation from the news and other sources that the battle, for them to talk about the battle being won is a classic overstatement. The battle against drugs has never been won. The battle against alcohol has been tried many times all over the world. Never been won. Never, never, never. Alcohol always wins. Drugs, if there's going to be a battle between all the resources of the United States against cocaine, nowhere to put your money. I mean, if it's going to be a race, if there's going to be a battle, you know, America's going down about the second round. See if anybody can get anything from this. It may sound a bit more everyday and practical. As you should, whenever you can find any reason to, whenever it seems to offer any opportunity to something in life to wink at you, is to give some sort of examination, a kind of running, conscious survey of what you're doing, just in everyday affairs, and to find things that you may be doing. There seems to be habits you have of behavior that may appear to be innocuous. They appear to be indifferent. They appear to be neither negative nor positively charged, but neutral. But it's something you do that is outside the norm. An example. Someone leaves their house unlocked. And this has nothing to do with the world going to hell and criminals hiding around every corner, and you still holding your breath waiting for me to finally break down and admit, yeah, it is. No, it ain't. It's got nothing to do with that. If it was true, it's got nothing to do with that. But here it is, let us say, that in the midst of civilization circa 1988, the vast majority of people like their houses. So let us say that you, for some reason, do not like your door. And maybe I'll pull out 2 or 3 other examples, but I've run across this even here in the group several times. Why would somebody do that? And if you ask yourself, if you had such a habit, all right, this is not the mainstream of life. You can't get into any judgment. You're simply aware of the fact that I've got certain habits and I have a way of doing things. And it is not the way that most people do things. But I do not see that there is any negative impact to it. In other words, I've been leaving my house unlocked for X number of months now, or years. Has anything ever happened? No, not a thing. There should be a continuing examination, not on the basis that nothing adverse has happened to me, but if I'm doing something outside the mainstream of behavior for my time and place, here's the question. Is it producing any positive benefit? This can be tricky and it can be blatant. And I say tricky because I still resist willfully myself, even verbally, of this byplay of it sounding too much as though I am on the verge or even hinting that I am or should be or might be handing out direct behavior directions that people should follow. That's not the way this is supposed to work. And it's not the way that I'm going to work it. And so I use all these devices and make up examples and have to go around about 200 miles out of my way to carry you from Times Square out to Queens. And we have to run around all kinds of circles for me to hope somewhere on the way that while we're driving around talking and me just ripping you off and you think that the fare should be only $12 and it's a straight shot and we'll be there in 15 minutes. It takes us 2 hours and the meter shows that it's $427. But we've got 4 hours of me riding around talking to you and pointing out this and that and making up lies and saying, oh, look over here, there's the Parthenon. Have you ever seen that before? And you ask me what time it is, and I say it's only 7 o'clock a.m., and you see it's dark. All that sort of thing. And so that if we finally get somewhere close to Queens, that you already got your own understanding about what this is about. So if I let you out, you don't really say goodbye, you don't say thank you, or you don't say this is nuts. You might say something like, you don't make keys, do you? I suggest that all of you have some things in your life that you do outside the mainstream And when I say they appear rather innocuous, and when I say that the ultimate question the revolutionists should be asking themselves is, all right, what I'm doing here, I don't see any negative benefit or any negative aspect of it right now. But the ultimate question should be this: does this produce, or can it produce, a positive benefit? And what you find, if you begin to look at it that way, is if it does not. Now, I hate to hint any more about how often you may find that to be the case, but you look at on the basis, all right, I started doing this, and it's outside the mainstream of behavior. And now that I think about it, I know that. There's no secret. In what way did I willfully decide it would be to my benefit to do this? When did I decide that? And of course, the dirty question, did I ever decide that? What I suggest to you most strongly is when you find an instance of some behavior you do, we're not talking about moral, sexual, it could be, I just don't want you to latch onto that deviates from the norm. I suggest when you question as to when, on what basis did I willfully decide to do this for certain positive benefits. At the instances you find that, well, I never did that, I suggest what you're going to find then is a number of possible negative aspects that you never considered. That is, I should not be doing this. So far it hasn't hurt me, but I shouldn't be doing this. Let's go back to the door before I try to push you into something less material. Somebody, you ask them, why don't you lock your door? Now, when did you decide that would be a benefit? In fact, what is the benefit of not locking your door? Now, you got to see you'd be hard-pressed. Why are you going to say, well, I don't have to carry around one more key? It saves me, I don't know what, 5 seconds a day, maybe 10 seconds a day total. Now, if I go in and out of the house, it might save me up to 40, 50 seconds a day taking the key and open the door. You can't find a positive benefit. There was no way that you decided that would be to my best interest. I don't care what the rest of the world does, this neighborhood. I don't care what they do, damn it. I see through this. I'm not going to lock my door. When you realize there was no such willful act, I did not do this for some specific potential positive benefit, then I suggest to you, you will see that although you may have never been hurt by this yet, there are all kinds of very potential, not to give you the blues, but potential negative impacts of it. And to use the door example, I shouldn't have to point it out. And no matter that if you get into some kind of conversation with your own nervous system, it could say, well, now wait a minute. I guess somebody could come in and steal my stuff, or somebody could come in and hide in there or be ramshacking my place, and then I walk in and they hurt me or shoot me or kill me. But it's, never happened in this neighborhood, and I'm not going to live like that. I'm not going to be afraid like that. You miss the point. It's not anything to argue over. It's not that I would be right and you wrong, or if you take it all internally, for you to be able to take this kind of survey to you and say, wait a minute, if I'm not doing this for some positive reason, then I begin to see that there are potential negative, quite specific, possible negative impacts. Then you get in an argument like, well, I'm not going to worry about that. You're still missing the point. Now how about behavior? How about things that you do? How about things that many of you, since we're all city bred, that you believe is some sign of your individuality? Like, I leave my mouth unlocked. I leave my brain unlocked. It just comes and goes, my words. I don't know, it's my quirky personality. That's the kind of guy I am. It passes, not that it's wrong in the city, but it passes under such names as individuality. And I bet if some of you string your nervous systems real hard, you can think back into at least later years in elementary school, and especially into junior high, that you affected a nickname. You insisted suddenly that all the guys call you Cookie. Or that you begin combing your hair in a certain way. Or you willfully begin to limp. Like that the rest of the kids, the other 13-year-old kids, are going to think that you was in a bad car wreck during the Le Mans last year while you were driving. Women do the same thing, but men, it seems to be a little more egregious. It's a little more noticeable. But it's like, well, this is a piece of me individually, that this is me trying to express myself. It's you leaving the door unlocked. To what possible, because you're now looking around and knowing you people out of town, you people are no longer 12 years old, you're no longer 17 years old. What seems to be your behavior that seems to be individual to you? That this is what the guys know me as. Yeah, I know I do so-and-so, but hell, that's me. Ask them, and you ask them what kind of guy I am, and one of the things they'll say is, oh, you know, one thing about him is he always does so-and-so. You know, would you believe that? A guy in his position, a guy at his age, still does so-and-so. To what possible, positive impact do you have this deviant behavior? As I remind you, I say deviant, I don't mean just sexually. That it's something that the majority of the people around you, the majority of people in your community, literally and otherwise, that they do not do and you do, or vice versa. Something that they don't do, and you, or something that they do and you don't do, or something that they don't do that you do. And it seems to be, if you would look at it in a certain way, in the broadest sense of the term, affected. That is, you grew up liking your door. Your parents liked the door as far as you know. Your grandparents liked their door. And if your great-grandparents were far enough out of the caves and the trees, I don't know your particular line of evolution, and they had doors, I'll bet you they liked their doors. And so now suddenly you don't like your door. All I want you to see is that is, in a sense, affected behavior. That is, at one time, you either lost a key or something seemed to happen. You went, well, I'm just not going to fool with it. In fact, it doesn't matter. I won't like my door, but you were aware of the fact this is not common behavior. I'm doing something that's uncommon to me. I'm doing something that's uncommon to the neighborhood, to my tribe, to life in general. Your life is full of them. Some of them can have a real impact. I would suggest if any of you are still leaving your doors unlocked or doing such as that, I would suggest they could have a serious impact. Not to scare you, I'm just telling you. You should know that. It's not proof of something to open yourself up to negative possibilities. And what you find if you begin to look, and look beyond doors, although not ignoring open doors, but look at some of the personal habits, the way in which you behave, the way in which you treat your body, the way in which you apparently treat your mind, what you apparently feed yourself in the intellectual food chain. And of course there is a blue circuit food chain. You will find that things you do that you now just accept, especially since most of you are beyond the age of your early or mid-20s, and seem to kind of settle down in the Fred uniform, the Mary uniform, either has kind of shrunk up due to the heat and age and it kind of fits better than it did at one time, or else there are other possibilities, and need I enumerate them for you, such as you got used to wearing a baggy personality. You got used to wearing an ill-fitting mind. But you have things that now seem to be an acceptable part of you individually. And the point of this, if I must tell you again, is not to turn out some kind of regimen. It's not to turn out a whole bunch of people that dress alike, look alike, think alike. None of you that's been around here can even have any fear of that anymore. But you are a regimen. You're a damn uniform. You're an unlocked door. You are deviant behavior. You should have a continuing survey going. Just in everyday things, like the door, even though I tell you it's more than that. The way in which you park your car. All sorts of things. That you do not do it exactly like you used to. You know for a fact, all you got to do is look around at it, that you don't do it the same way that most people do it. And you can't get involved like, well, most people are idiots. Most people don't know their ass from their elbow and all that stuff. Right. But you got to remember this. Most people are most people. Most people are the majority, and the majority are most people. Life has a great affection for most people, or he wouldn't have made them most. So when you look around and you find, are there things I do that are not part of most people's repertoire, then right quick, if you got to do this, and you already heard it, is ask yourself, all right, what was the basis originally? I got a fair memory. What was the basis? Why did I decide to do this? What was the benefit that I expected to receive? Every time you find that, I suggest, all you got to do is just right after that you see that there are possible, very possible, negative consequences of it. It's another little something that can be serious in life, but it is another little something that people are always wondering what to do, and am I going to go back or not? We're meeting 3 times a week, give excursions 3 times a week. Should I tell you something to be doing every little minute? Life is talking. Your participation in life is continually talking. It's making hand signals, it's doing all kinds of things, except you're looking with one eye, you're listening with one ear. It's all being filtered through deviant behavior. It's all being filtered through your individuality. And being a Friday night, the way things are now, we're on a short tape, and I'm going to stop the public side here to give a little excursion. For you public people, this is the end of public tape. And it's also the end of public tape for you people out here that get run out of the rooms in other cities when I say it's the end of public tape. And then some of you then ask the people who do not seem to be part of the public, you ask them later, why do you not let me see anything after the end of public tape? Did that answer it? If so, it just shows it was just a test to see how much attention you were paying. You failed. We ready? This is not as simple, if I must say this, as it may sound. And I want all of you to consider this. It's just a considering excursion. But what appears to be the question I'm going to ask is not the purpose. Jesus. If the purpose was the kind of questions I ask when I say consider so-and-so or neuralize so-and-so, if that was actually the purpose, I wouldn't even bother to ask it. Right? Here's what I want to know. Here's what I want you to try and neuralize. That is, try and get some comprehension outside the current establishment of your own nervous system. It's what difference would it make to you and your apparent ability to hear this? If I actually gave if I verbally gave some indication as to this coming from something, such as, let me give you 3 possibilities. And just remember it, or make a note if you can't remember it, that I want you to take these 3 general possibilities I could do, and what I want you to do is neuralize whether this would make any difference in you and your ability to hear this, and of course something else at another angle that I'm not talking about, but start off from this. Would it make any difference if I said that I, regardless of whatever you think I've said up until now, or whatever you think I hadn't said, what if I announce, well, it's time to come clean? Well, all right, it's time to make some sort of statement that we're too deep into this, most of you. So, possibility 1, would it make any difference? What if I said, all right, everything that I've ever said and everything I'm going to say, as far as I know, I learned it from a guy. I mean, he's no longer here, he's not available, but I studied and somebody taught me this, somebody told me this and made it available, not in a dissimilar fashion that I'm trying to do with you. Possibility 1. Possibility 2, the good old one, I got it from supernatural sources. I got it from the gods. For you people who are persnickety, I got it from God. I got it from cosmic forces. I got it through supernatural means. Second possibility. Third possibility is I simply figured all this out. I mean, I individually, no sense talking about it, I can't tell you, I'm not going to try to tell you much more, but I figured all this out. I came up with it. I guess I got through in the 4th possibility because it's already here. And that is the way I've treated it thus far. But still the first 3, neuralize it. There's more to it. I'm not asking for some specific question. If any of you get anything out of this, as always, feel quite free to drop me a note. I love to see it when you actually get something. But the question is more than I verbally expressed. it does have a great, inescapable impact in city life as to where something came from, the source of some information. No matter what it is, all the way from science, there's got to be, you're not going to take some cockamamie scientific idea about a perpetual motion machine, as silly as that is, but you're certainly not even going to entertain even reading a paragraph about it unless it starts at the heading that new insights made into the possibilities of the theories of a potential perpetual motion machine, Dr. So-and-so, MIT. You're not going to fool the religion, the mainstream of the city, the bell curve of the city. Or some guy that comes out dressed in an army blanket with a petunia growing out of his head saying God is a Martian. The apparent source of information all the way from what would appear to be extremes of religion to science, the source of it is extremely, inescapably important. And so there's all kinds of hints of things that some of you could really get something from. By neuralizing this, by seriously considering what I have asked you, and then there's something else. But by just taking what I ask, would it make any difference to you and your ability, as far as you can tell, to hear this, if I said, the time's come, rather than me just stand here and not say anything, to tell you, and consider, neuralize those three possibilities. What effect, if any, would it have? Part of the little secret part I'm not saying is to your ordinary people, the question about what effect, could it have, is a complete misspeak. Or to say, would it have any effect? You're damn right it would. It'd have every effect in the world if you were ordinary. Every effect. If I said, the God's told me this, or if you said, the only way that you'd know this is you had to get through supernatural forces, and I said, hey, stuff supernatural forces. I don't even believe in supernatural forces. Now, boy, are you off the track. If I got them somewhere, I didn't get them from supernatural forces. If you're ordinary, that'd have a hell of an effect. Any of those three would have a serious effect. So that's part of the little trick, the way life is arranged. But remember, the way I started out this excursion is asking you, would it now make any difference to you and your apparent, as best you can guess, your ability to get something out of this if I gave you one of those three possibilities? I mean, it made you believe as much as I make you believe in this other. That I just stated, that I'm compelled to tell you this, that there is a source for this, and it is, and I give you one of those three. Now, see, that's when we had to run the public people out of the room. I guess.